decision. It wasn't going to automatically void whether he hit the sack number or hit the playing time. It would have been at the end of the day, it would have been his decision, and obviously it was, which is a smart move because the Vikings were not going to be able to afford him at the $13.9 million cap hit that he has in 2020. There's just no way. We know that the team going into free agency was, estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 12 million over the cap. They had to make this move in order to get themselves back in a secure financial position, and they're certainly not even done yet. This kind of gets them to ground zero, and they certainly have a lot more work to do. But for Griffen, it means he's a free agent, and yes, he's on the roster until the first day of the league year, which is when free agency starts in March. But the way he's played in this year, coming back after some of the off the field stuff, the personal concerns he was dealing with in 2018, I think shows you that he still has it. And I know that we talked about this on Tuesday when we were going over various scenarios before I knew this news of what could happen for him. But I do think that the best place for Everson Griffen is going to be in Minnesota to come back on a restructured deal, just like he did last year, because Everson had a chance when, going into last offseason, he had a chance to go and bet on himself in free agency. He could have said, no, I'm not going to take the restructure. I'm going to go look somewhere else. And he didn't. So I think that clearly tells you how the player feels about the team that drafted him, that stood by him for 10 seasons, that, helped him elevate his status to a Pro Bowler, that was there with him as he dealt through some mental health concerns in 2018 that forced him to step away from the game for a little bit. And also help bring him back and give him this opportunity where he got to start at defensive end last year and didn't have to look over his shoulder and worry about becoming a rotational pass rusher. So it means he's a free agent. That's the bottom line. But, is he going to go somewhere else? What's his trade market what's his free agent market look like? I think his best fit's going to be in Minnesota. I mean, there are other places that are always looking for pass rushers, and the value of a pass rusher is high, but given the things that I just spoke about, I do think that he would have his best years to come still at the end of his career in Minnesota.
Totally agree with you, especially because you look at the other side, you have Danielle Hunter. So you're obviously going to have success on that field no matter what. But do you really think that he's not going to want to say for the first time, like, hey, listen, I kind of want to test the market and see what's out there because defensive ends are making so much more money now?
Wisconsin.
Way to go, Wisconsin.
Come on, Wisconsin. Your men's basketball team and your phone reception are the worst. Flopping. Anyway.
I agree with what Courtney said. I think that he would absolutely benefit the most from staying here. But I think that for him to be like, hey, listen, I don't want to at least test the market a little bit would be something uncharacteristic of a football player.
I had the same thought myself when Courtney reported this morning that he was opting out, that I think he might want to see, because rotational pass rushers who are in their 30s, or even guys who can play at the whole game like Everson Griffen still can, still bring a lot of value. Even somebody like Justin Houston was excellent this year, and Terrell Suggs comes back for the Kansas City Chiefs and is a good rotational player for them, and he's much older than Everson Griffen. Courtney, I'm not sure if you heard what Alex asked you before it zoinked out because of Wisconsin, but do you think that Everson Griffen would be interested in testing the market because it's a position of such high priority for a lot of teams?
Just before I start that, I'm going to preface, I pulled over on the side of the road. That's how much dedication I have for both of you. I have my flashers going. If I get hit by a semi, then Boone, you can have my headphones. I guess that's probably the one.
Don't say that.
No, but to answer your question, I think that you got to look at the situation last year and apply it here. Everson had a chance to hit free agency last year when it was very clear that they were not going to be able to afford him at the cap hit in 2019, and he came back on that restructured deal. I think that he's had a good precedent ahead of him to learn kind of from guys who have done this before. I wrote about this last spring with the Jared Allen situation and kind of comparing that to where he had spoken about, had he stayed in Minnesota and not gone to Chicago, I mean, the grass isn't always greener. And I think that there are examples that Everson has learned from, has looked at, guys who are ahead of him that show him maybe the trajectory for my career that fits best is me staying in Minnesota to play another 2 years and maybe continue to do these short-term deals where, he either has to restructure or it's a void situation again. I mean, whatever it is, his best fit is probably going to be in Minnesota instead of testing out the market in free agency for a number of reasons, simply being that if you, like I've mentioned on the show multiple times, if you go somewhere and you don't perform at the level that they expect you to perform at, you could be out of the league in a year. And I think in Minnesota, they know him so well. They know what makes him work in a defense and the ways to make him successful, that it's probably his best fit and in his best interest for the rest of his career to stay in Minnesota.
Agreed, but now you have to take a look because you said it. They just broke even by letting go of Ev, and you've already reports that Dalvin Cook's not coming back this offseason. Like, hey, don't expect him there until he gets the deal he needs. The purge is clearly already started. The question is, who's next, and who can they bring back after they let go?
A good point. I think Linval Joseph is the first one that we're going to look at beyond Everson Griffen, because that cap hit is way too high for a nose tackle on the other side of 30, and beyond that, there's just not a huge trade market for true nose tackles. I mean, it's not like he really plays 3 technique anymore. I mean, we haven't seen that in a number of years, but I think that he would be probably the next cap casualty because you have Armon Watts, you have Jaleel Johnson, you can play a rotation between the two of them in lieu of Joseph. If he doesn't come back at a restructured deal, which realistically it probably makes sense to be about a third of that, maybe half, because $11 million is pretty high, and you get about 10.5 in cap savings if you cut him.
Talking with Courtney Cronin, ESPN, she broke the news this morning of Everson Griffen opting out of his contract, making him a free agent. So what do they do if Everson Griffen, say, signs with Seattle or something? And then you're left with, you have to probably still move on from Linval Joseph. You don't have Everson Griffen. You really didn't have anyone creating pressure from the 3 technique last year, except for Afadi Adenabo and Stephen Weatherly mixing in over the guards. I mean, the defensive line is pretty barren without a whole lot of assets to fill it back up, Courtney.
Yeah, I think first off, like at the combine, you're going to be looking at defensive tackles to begin with. I mean, that is a position of need. It's not like the most pressing need, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. But if Griffen does say, hey, I want to go play somewhere else, even though, that press conference right after the Vikings lost in the divisional playoffs, he did say that he wants to, he enjoys it here. He wants to be a Viking. If he decides that the money's too good to pass up somewhere else, and you can't fault him for that, the Vikings have to go to the rotation, and they probably have to either find another pass rusher on the maybe tier 2 and tier 3 market, because you just can't afford the top of the line with your cap situation and all the other things that are pressing needs, or you draft somebody, and you continue to build out your team and develop that way. But I do have a really strong belief that Minnesota wants him back here, certainly, but also will be able to work out a deal just because his market is probably at its best. His value is probably at its best in Minnesota. Like, let's point out the basics here. I mean, he's been here since 2010. It's a team that drafted him. This is a defense that he knows very, very well. His athleticism certainly has not gone anywhere, as we saw from that stretch in the playoffs where he was an interior pass rusher. I mean, they did that to be able to generate in the pocket that they just didn't have with their aforementioned defensive tackles. So I think that he has a lot of value and a lot of benefit and is a really big part of defense still. And if if the bar is 7 or 8 sacks, he can get you that even at 33 years old, which is the age he turns this season.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that 8 sacks next year. But here's a question. Who is it put more pressure on now, Anthony Barr or Danielle Hunter?
Well, I mean, Barr is a good one, Alex. I think that maybe with Dom Capers and this defense has room and coming up with some ideas. What Mike Zimmer said, well, hey, did you think of it that way? Well, haven't we been thinking about Anthony Barr as a pass rusher for, I don't know, the last few years, and it's never really happened? Mm-hmm. Maybe this is the chance now that you can actually make Anthony Barr into an edge rusher, into somebody who does it more than just on an occasional third down in a various sub package. Like, that could be the chance to live up to the money that they set aside for him when he came back last year, and also do something that he's talked about wanting to do it more frequently. I think he kind of quieted on that for whatever reason last year, but he certainly has been very vocal in the past about wanting to be a pass rusher, and this could present an opportunity to do so.
Courtney, I wrote today at scorenorth.com, our free website, what should the Vikings do with Riley Reiff? The best thing I could come up with is to give him a contract extension, which sounds really weird, but let me explain. If you don't think a rookie can step right in and you can't get one of the top free agent tackles, then you're probably looking at overpaying an average free agent tackle, which guess what? You're already overpaying an average tackle to begin with. So the only way to lower his cap hit is to extend him like they did with Linval Joseph, and you'll end up just cutting him down the road. That's the best I could come up with. What is your sense of how they feel about Riley Reiff?
He's the conundrum. Like, it's a really tough one to decide upon because, like you said, you're probably not going to go unless you want to trade Stephon Diggs, if you want to start that stuff back up again. If there was something on the table for an offensive tackle, I think you'd listen. But in the real world, where we are right now, I mean, that's just not on the table. So I think that certainly becomes a priority in the draft for them. But in the short term, it makes sense to try to get his cap number down and try to give yourself some flexibility financially to go after other positions that you need, because he's done a fine job. He's not elite. He's not great. He's good. And I think that that's all you kind of need right now until you really are ready to move Brian O'Neill over to left tackle. And like Alex was mentioned on the show, I mean, it's not just as simple as you think of doing that this year. So maybe it's a possibility. Maybe it's not. Maybe you lower his cap number and continue to toy around with the idea of moving him inside the guard. I mean, I know that was a hot topic last offseason. It wouldn't surprise me if something like that comes back up again, just because we're just trying to crunch the numbers and figure out how to make this work and maybe try to fill another position of need at left guard, and then it leaves another hole. So, I mean, it's just, as I said, a giant conundrum, but reducing his number does reduce the cap hit that comes with it.
Courtney, am I really to believe that the Vikings want to trade Stephon Diggs away?
No. Did we talk about this already? I got all huffy and puffy on Tuesday. I mean, honestly, unless there is something you cannot refuse, like unless it, puts you in line for the number 2 pick, like we've talked about, like if they really can't work out an extension with Kirk Cousins and they need a quarterback and you don't want to wait till the second round or get somebody at 25 because who knows might be there at that point. If you really wanted to move up, then sure. But I think in the sense of getting a tackle, that is the only time, if I was pulling the strings, that's the only time I would really entertain it, because you're not just going to give him away for free or, feed into any sort of hysteria that's expanded upon social media. You have to have a reason to do it. I mean, he's too darn good to just want to give away. And I know that the Vikings do not want that, and that's not where their head is